day, isn't it? I wanted to share with you up here, Dave and I are going to be talking to you about some of our Essene experiences in our Essene life, because that's what we are ministers of, is of the Essenes. And our days always start out with these sayings. And I think some of you were here when we've done it before with candles. And we came up front and lit the candles, and there were 7 people, and each one said something differently. So that's what that is all about, for those of you who might be wondering what that is. Let us start the morning this morning with prayer. Holy Spirit, we say thank you. Thank you for giving us yet another day in which to express our love and gratitude. Thank you. Thank you, Holy Spirit, for giving us the power of choice. As we choose to make our lives full and complete, let us plant the seed of love and peace in our heart's consciousness. From that planting comes the mighty power of universal love and peace. We do thank you for directing our hearts to walk upon this path of love, giving us everlasting blessings with eternal joy. May our expression of life always, always be in the name of the Christ within. Thank you. And so it is. Amen. This morning, I'm going to be doing kind of an intro as to what Dave's and my message will be for the main service. And first of all, I'd like to read this. It came from a gentleman by the name of Ian Lawton. You have all sorts of roles and personas. They are valid and important. Embody them fully. However, they are time-bound and don't fully capture your essence. Your true essence could never be captured by an occupation, a gender, a religion, or even a personality type. Your true essence is beyond words and description. You are nothing less than a Christ, a child of God, an expression of universal love in this moment. Isn't that beautiful? Love it. What I want to share with you is some history relative to where Dave and I have come from. We've gone through many paths, and oh man, we've traveled a lot of roads in our spiritual life, as I imagine most of us have. And during that time, Dave and I became involved with what was called the Essene quote-unquote movement. But the Essenes date back hundreds of years before Christ even. And they're not sure just how far back it goes, but they can trace back a certain time frame. But the newer, updated, as one would say, which dates back to the early 1900s, but that's new relative to the Essene movement, was started by a man called Edmund Bordeaux Zeke. Now, you spell his name S-Z-E-K-E-L-Y, but it's pronounced Zeke. He is from what was then called Transylvania, which then became Romania. And he founded what was called the first Christian church, and then in parentheses of that was Essenes. And that was established in 1937 in his home country. And then he moved to Canada, and he started a first Christian Essene church there and reestablished everything in 1974. So I'm going to read a little bit of what he has to say here about how he got started in this. The several chapters of this book are compiled from material antedating the findings of the Dead Sea Scrolls in 1947. During the 20 preceding years, 1927 to 1947, I wrote and published a number of books on the Essenes, based on certain historical sources such as the works of Josephus Flavius, Philo, and Plinius, and on manuscripts in the Library of the Vatican, the Library of the Habsburgs in Vienna, and the Library of the British Museum. In these books, I concentrated on the Essene traditions, which I consider of great practical value for modern man. Now, I want to backtrack there a little bit. He's talking about the Library at the Vatican. He wrote a book about his experience during that time. He was a very young man, and he knew the guardian, as one might say. He was one of the priests, but he was the guardian of the basement library, which rarely anyone is allowed into except some of the higher priests. And he allowed Mr. Zeke to go down and into that depths of that library and study and to find what the messages that he was looking for. He found scrolls and studied things that many of us have no access to, and many of the media or anyone else do not have access to. And that's how his Essene movement or his Essene church came into being, from those scriptures that he found that are now very deep and very secret. So Dave wrote a little saying, or a little excerpt here for us, so that, because we could get into this and it can be days. The Essenes, he's going to describe for you kind of basically what the Essenes were. The Essenes were a sect of the early Jewish community whose written history can be traced back to more than 250 years B.C. They subscribed to the concept that we are indeed our brother's keeper. Early on, the Essenes became known through their common dress, which was white, their scholarship, and their status as healers, or they were called therapeutae. And they usually lived in small communities, and they were usually like at the edge of the town, what we would call a town, or their community. And they were always there for whomever needed them, always. They were there to heal. They were there if you needed food. They were the providers of anyone who was in need at that time. The Essenes were minority minority inhabitants of many communities throughout all of Judea, and expressed their ways of living through their reputations as being healers. They subscribed to the power of prayer, but also to the powers of physical assistance. A broken bone must be reset and securely bound until healing took place. A severe cut or other wound must be cleansed, medicated, and dressed. An intestinal illness required medicines known to be effective at that time. The Essenes knew that healing was a verb that required understanding and appropriate intervention as well as right thinking. They were resourceful, successful, and humble. They were the first in our known world to realize that God was not a separate entity, a super something or other out there and beyond our comprehension, but as an indwelling presence to be found in each and every one of us, even the Samaritans, the Egyptians, and all other tribes and nations of that time. Jesus would eventually emerge from the womb of the Essene community and be nurtured throughout his earlier years in their philosophy of an indwelling deity of which all men and women were a part. His was a family that honored all persons and all beings as expression of a loving, highly personal, indwelling deity. They never killed, and they never consumed the flesh of another being, no matter where mankind located that being on the hierarchical scale of the time. Today we would call them vegans. Then they were revered as healers. The one thing they never had, nor did they practice, is the art of war or aggression. And one of Dave's favorite sayings is the reason why you didn't hear a lot about the Essenes or why they're not in the Bible so very much is just because of that. They weren't warmongers. They didn't cause any kind of publicity to be printed about. So that's why the Essenes were very quiet, just nondescript people as far as those writers were concerned. They practiced in their daily routines what was to be known as turn the other cheek, when someone could think of no better response than to resort to physical violence when threatened or confused. Consequently, in those turbulent times, the Essenes were often the first to fall during times of aggressive actions. We can see that in the life of Jesus and many other gentle leaders to follow. Do not mistake such greatness and such gentleness and humility as weakness or cowardness, but as a conviction, a knowingness that transcends the human experience. It is possible to win everything and yet have nothing, but all things are possible through love. Now, I think everyone has heard of the Dead Sea Scrolls, right? Okay. The Essenes were pretty much responsible for all of the findings that they've been making since the 40s. They figure there's probably still some out there. They had, in Qumran, they had what was called a library, or the scriptorium would be another word. And scrolls were brought in from other areas. That's why they're saying, well, it couldn't have been the Essenes because it doesn't match up with some of the writings that the Essenes did. Well, it was a library, and they brought in scrolls from all over the world at that time and kept those things so that they could be in a place for people to study. As you know, illiteracy was hot and heavy in those days. There weren't very many people who knew how to write or read. And so there would be those who were of that ilk to come and study there. When the Romans started taking over, they knew they were in deep trouble. So they started taking these scrolls throughout the world, plus they hid some in the caves behind Qumran and all up in those hills. So that explains some of the Dead Sea Scrolls and some of what and why Dave and I are going to be talking about what we're going to be talking about later. And I took quite a bit of time for that, and I apologize, but I really wanted to have some background for you. Some of you had been coming to our Essene church, so you were pretty familiar with some of this, with what we had been doing.
The love of God is active within and among my family and me. My family is in my thoughts and prayers. Whether I consider family to include my parents and siblings, an extended group of relatives, or people with whom I have chosen to share life, my family is important to me. As family members, we may not always agree on every matter, but we are connected by the love of God that is within each one of us. As I pray for each person, I deepen my awareness of the power for good in God's transforming, healing, enriching love. I honor the love that creates a gentle but unbreakable bond among my family members and me. The love of God that is active within and among those I hold dear to me. And I know that through God's love, even closer relationships are possible. And from Deuteronomy 5:16, honor your father and your mother as the Lord your God commanded you, so that your days may be long and that it may go well with you.
Let the sounds of the outer fade as we go into that inner stillness. Go to that quiet place. Tune in and listen to your heart song. As we come to that moment of quiet and relaxation, let us turn our thoughts to our hearts Place your hand over your heart. Feel the heartbeat. Feel the power of Spirit working within your body. What is your message today? Know that God speaks to you. Listen. Listen. As you listen, let us go deeper within. Go down to your most tranquil place. Hear that heart song of love and peace. Listen. Listen. Each of us may hear a melody, a voice that is our very own. We set aside our distressed thoughts and differences. Let judgment go by the wayside. Listen to your heart song. It will help you diffuse the negative thoughts and actions. Listen to your heart song. Listen. As we realize it is our own thoughts that can impact universal mind, we become excited, knowing we are the masters of our own creation. Will that creation be positive or negative? Listen to your heart song. Listen. Listen. As we explore this tapestry of life we are experiencing, what do we see to create for the future of this universe? For our children, for our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren. Listen. Listen. Our heart song knows only love and peace. Only love and peace. Having heard that still small voice now, let us come slowly back, slowly return to this place of love and worship. Return to this now, bringing your message with you. Will you act upon that heart song that you've just received? Slowly open your eyes and give that loved one next to you a look of love, a touch, a hug if you will. Know all is well. Directions here. To start out our message, I'm going to read from the Essenes version of 1 Corinthians 13. Though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I am become a sounding brass or a tinkling cymbal. Though I tell what is to come, and know all secrets and all wisdom, and though I have faith strong as the storm which lifts mountains from their seat, but have not love, I am nothing. And though I bestow all my goods to feed the poor, and give all my fire that I have received from my Father, but have not love, I am in no wise profited. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love is not envious, works not evil, knows not pride, is not rude, neither selfish, is slow to anger, imagines no mischief, rejoices not in injustice, but delights in justice. Love defends all, love believes all, love hopes all, love bears all. It never exhausts itself. But as for tongues, they shall cease, and as for knowledge, it shall vanish away. For we have truth in part, and error in part. But when the fullness of perfection is come, that which is in part shall be blotted out. When a man was a child, he spoke as a child, he understood as a child, and he thought as a child. But when he became a man, he put away childish things. For now we see through a glass and through dark sayings. Now we know in part, but when we are come before the face of God, we shall not know in part, but even as we are taught by him. And now remain these three, faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love.
Today we want to talk about faith and love. Am I loud enough? Okay. I never know because I don't hear well. The only nice thing about it is that every now and then I can escape into a world that I'm the only one there, and much to my wife's chagrin. But we wanted to come to you this morning from an Essene perspective, but the one thing you need to know about the Essenes is they're not somebody to move in and take over. That has never been a part of the Essene philosophy. The primary drive for an Essene is to be of assistance, to help others, because they know what it is that they know, and they feel that they are doing the work that was given to them. And every community, every group needs the support. And it's almost, I wrote an article called The Shadow Dancers. And the Essenes are pretty much the original shadow dancers. And what that refers to is that you see a pinnacle and something setting on it, but you don't see the underpinnings. And without the underpinnings, nothing else can work. Somebody has to do the floors, so to speak. Otherwise, nobody could get down the aisle to stand in front of other people. So there's a whole bunch of us that are shadow dancers in this world. It's just part of the deal, and it's nothing to be ashamed of. It's an honor to be able to clear the way for others. And this was pretty much the Essene perspective on life, that they knew in their hearts what was expected of them and where they were going and who they were. And so they didn't need the pulpit, so to speak. Now, I've read a zillion books, literally, that relate to all aspects of the religious and the philosophic world, and things of that nature. And I hear I'm echoing. That's nice. It's like coming from a cave. This is by Thomas Jefferson. He was quite a guy, aside from being our third president. And what he did is he took a look at the Bible and he says, well, there's so much gibberish in there, I don't know what I want. I can't deal with all that. There's some things there that just aren't nice. And I feel I must agree with that. There's parts of the Bible that I really don't care to read, even though I do. But he decided to do something about it, so he took he took the New Testament and excised everything he didn't understand and everything that didn't make sense in a world as we know it, which he excised quite a bit of it. But there's one statement he made that I think is something that everybody will identify with, and that to me is the crux of the whole thing. And this is that statement: it is in our lives and not our words that our religion must be read. Now, that's not very many words, a dozen or so, but stop and think about the import of what that is. Doesn't make any difference what you say, but what do you do? How do you live your life? Is it the kind that you want to go up before the judge? I've been before judges before, and they're not very nice to go before sometimes. So but you're going to hand it to them on the platter and say, well, this is my life. I think there's all of us have, we'd kind of like to sweep a little off here and there. But this is the thing that he was talking about, is that we have to live our religion, not just espouse it. Because it's so easy to say, you and you will do this. And a guy that did this in the history that we know about. Ever hear of Constantine? Well, he enacted the Council of Nicaea, and which from there a lot of the things that we have in our books come from, because he brought East and West together. Not that he wanted to, and not that he was a joiner or anything of that nature. It's just that he wanted to do away with some thoughts that he didn't like. And he melded these different religions that were all Christian to whatever degree they chose to be, and put them into the one that we have now, as it's called our Holy Bible, and which has a lot of good things in it. And there's some other things that aren't, that at least that I don't care much for. And Constantine managed to not join a church. He created it, but he didn't join it until he was on his deathbed. And I mean, you can say a lot of things about Constantine, but he wasn't dumb. And he had some things to do and get out of the way that he didn't want to have to answer for, so he didn't become a card-carrying Christian, I guess you might say, until it was too late for him to do anything to screw it up. And so that's, and then we built on it from there. And it's not to make light of the book or of the concepts or the ideas. There are a lot of things in it that I question just on a personal basis, but I have a Strong's Concordance to the Bible, big thick thing, and what you can do is, if you remember a part of most of you probably know this, but if you remember a part of a saying or something, why, you go into the concordance and you look it up, and sure enough, there it is, if you're lucky. Sometimes you don't remember the right word and you'll never find it. But anyway, I went to Leviticus. I got this out of Strong. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to I was looking up love, and boy, there's a lot of love in there. And some of it, don't read what's in front of it or behind it. Just look at the love and let it go at that. Accept it. But love your neighbor as yourself. And I wanted to see where that first originated. And as near as I can tell from mine, that come from Leviticus 19:18. Now, like I say, if you read the words that coming up to it and the words on beyond it, it gets a little frightening. But in there is this little jewel: love your neighbor as yourself, which I think is, if you didn't know anything else at all about any theology or any religion, if you would take that one and say, I'm going to put that in my heart and live with it, I think you'd do real well in the way in which you conduct your life. But when you get very far beyond it or before it, Leviticus gets pretty hairy. So, but from there on, and then when you get into the Newer Testament that most Christians of our persuasion follow, things get a lot gentler, but there's still some rough spots in there, and that's where Tom come in. He knew what was in the big book, and he decided that he was going to rejuvenate the smaller one, the New Testament, and it's interesting. It's worth a read, and it makes a lot of sense. But what we're talking about this morning is love and forgiveness. And I think the general theme of the most of the Bible that I choose to read, and what resonates in my heart, is the idea of love. Nothing happens without love that is really, really good. And when I say good, I guess that's from a perspective. But love seems to be the underpinning of all of the virtuous activities that go on in this world. If it's built on some form of love, if it's nothing more than respect and love are synonyms to a degree. And this is what we're trying to do, and to me, this is what the unity movement is. I feel when I come into this group of people, a small group like this or a larger one, that it's the love that binds us. It's the love that greases the skids, so to speak, to get us going. And forgiveness is something that it's the shadow dancer for love, because you've got to build it on forgiveness. Somebody's going to, reach out and thwack you with a stick or something once in a while, and you might say, well, I think I'll get up and thwack him back, but that just leads to more thwacking, and so from that, this is where the forgiveness thing comes in, and we really want to stay away from an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, and boy, you can fall into that real quick, anywhere at any time. Now, one of the how am I doing on? Oh, I'm not doing well though. Pardon?
We'll just get to do this part.
Oh, okay. Should I shut up here?
Shut.
Okay. I don't know. I have a hard time with this breaking it. A lot of years ago, when I was a little boy, and I guarantee it. I was breaking things even then. I fell off a pig pen and broke my arm one time. So, and it was because I was doing something I shouldn't do. But prior to that, my buddy and I, there's people lived up the road, and we were not a very religious family, and they were. And up on the hill, not far from the house, was the House of God church. And so I didn't know much about church, but that's the House of God, and so that's where God was. But my buddy and I had little dump trucks, and we wanted to go into the earth moving business, and so we didn't have a good spot at home, so we went up to his yard, and we found a little spot off in the corner and had some loose dirt in it. So he and I were taking our shovels and loading up our trucks and making good noises and going and dumping them. And his mom come out, and she didn't see the progress in what we were doing. It struck her as being something she didn't want to have done. And of course, we hadn't cleared the way yet either. So he got, I guess I can say, her name is Mrs. Burgett, and they were very religious. And Ellsworth was the kid's name, but nobody called him Ellsworth. He was Baby Burgett. They had enough to fill, I think, this whole room of kids. And he happened to be the last one. He was my age, 4. And she snapped him up and gave him a swat and sent him up the stairs. And she looked over at me and she says, "It's a good thing I stopped you, because the devil was right down there and he was going to come up and get you. And now you go home." And I'm 4 years old, and the only thing I ever knew about the devil was up there on that house where God was. Well, they talked about him quite a lot. I went to Sunday school with a friend of mine, and I heard about him, and I even saw a picture, so I knew what I was looking for. And I looked at that, and I thought, oh my. So I grabbed my truck, and I'm ready to head home, and I'm thinking what I'm going to tell Mom. because I'm coming back early, and then I got to looking. If the devil's going to be in that hole, it was probably about that deep that we dug, if that. Before I got to the roadway, there was a ditch, and a driveway come across the ditch. Back in the old days, there were ditches in all roads. And I looked at that ditch, and I thought, if I'm about to reach him right there, I'm sure as the world's going to see him out in that ditch. And so I thought the only way that I can get out of here, and the driveway was about twice as wide as this hallway here. And I got right in the middle of that, and I thought, well, I'll turn on the afterburners, and I'll get out to the middle of the road, because there's a ditch on the other side too. And if I can get out there, I'm okay. So I tore off down the road, and the devil didn't get me as I went across the ditch. I made that one, and I ended up in the middle of the road, and then I got to thinking, if I walk on the sides where it's supposed to, I've been told to, he can reach up and get me. So I walked down the middle of the road about 5 houses down, and then I had to do the same thing to get across my driveway or into the house. And I went running into the house, and I remember Mom was sitting there, and I jumped right up in her arms, and I put my arms around her neck. I didn't tell her. But I have never felt so close to my mother, ever, as I did at that point. And she wouldn't know it was wrong, and I wasn't going to tell her. It wasn't any way I was going to share that. So I just told her I loved her, and I just thought it was time to come in and talk to her. So I stayed there for quite a while. And you know how things will kind of wear off after a while. You eventually learn to live with something. And I went back outside again, and I'd look at that ditch, and for the longest time, I never would walk over by the ditch, because I didn't know if that's where that guy was or not. And I hadn't seen him yet, but I knew where he come from, down under. And you know, that stayed with me for a long, long time. I never went back to church, because that house up there is where he also lived, because I know God lived there, and they talked about the devil. So my experience on churches was not stellar, you might say. And that poor lady, Mrs. Burgett, and this is where the forgiveness comes in, she had no idea what she'd done. None. She was totally ignorant of it, but a 4-year-old kid can remember some things that you'd never think they can remember, and you got to be careful when you're talking to them, because they can take something like that and run forever. It lasted a long time for me. And the last thing, I didn't go to any church until I met Joyce, and she insisted that I'd go down and pick her up. I kind of walked up the middle of the stairs too, but that was the only time I'd go to church, and it was a long time before I ever had any inclination to want to go out and to explore into that, because of that one situation. And bless Mrs. Burgett's soul, she had no concept of how that affected a kid. And with me, I thought about that as I was raising my own children, and we weren't a real churchy family, but I certainly didn't want to leave the kids with that kind of an impression. And it is one of those things that love is the one thing you've got to show your children and those around you, if this is going to be a better place to live. And the forgiveness is sometimes to forgive yourself for coming up short, and other times is to forgive your neighbor because he probably didn't mean what he said, or she. And so I think I've just about wasted my time. So anyway, the whole concept is love and forgiveness. And forgive me for taking so long.
The activities, programs, and services of this ministry are presented on a love offering basis. All gifts, regardless of size, are gratefully accepted. You may participate either by sending your gift to Christ Unity Church, 540 North Holly Street, Medford, Oregon, 97501, or by visiting us on the internet at www.unitymedford.org.